Welcome to another edition of Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willis, your host. Today, we are honored to have Reverend Markel Hutchins, who is the CEO of Movement Forward. He says the following, and I want you to listen distinctly. We've done the marching, we've done the protesting, and now it's time to do the heavy lifting of decreasing bias, increasing respect and trust, protecting the lives of young men and women, but protecting the lives of our law enforcement professionals as well. Reverend Hutchins, welcome to Politics Done Right.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
First of all, tell us a little bit about the reason that you formed Movement Forward.
You know, I've been at the forefront of human and civil rights advocacy for the last 25 years. Since I was a teenager, I was mentored by all of the icons that worked very closely with Martin Luther King Jr., including his wife, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, and Congressman John Lewis, and Jesse Jackson, and Andrew Young, and so many others. There really is a need for another generation of leadership to emerge in the King tradition of leadership. This idea that somehow we can separate or segregate our morality is what led me to believe that we needed another movement. We needed to take the best of the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the movement for LGBTQ rights, all of those movements, and move them forward into more cooperative space, into a larger context, into a collaborative approach to actually solving problems. It's one thing to raise the issues, but it's another thing entirely to deal with the problems in a solution-focused manner. And that's why we created Movement Forward, to be a modern and inclusive human and civil rights organization that takes the work of the movements in the past and brings them forward.
So you are not just, your agenda doesn't only include having police officers do the right thing. It's much more inclusive than that.
It is, but the idea, the subject matter of criminal justice, and particularly policing in America, is the most pressing human and civil rights issue in our consciousness today. So that is the issue that we are focused on at this moment in time. What we try to do differently than some of the organizations that have gone before us is we try to deal inclusively and comprehensively, if you will, with the human and civil rights or social justice causes that are before us. And I think it's something that we've missed over the last, 35 years of activism. It's kind of been one issue to another, as opposed to actually focusing on a single subject matter and figuring out a solution before you move on to another subject matter. And that's the kind of approach that we take to our activism in this moment.
In a constructively critical manner, give me organizations by name that you think probably require some change of direction in your view?
Well, I think we have to, it's tough to call names because I'm a member of these organizations. But when you look at organizations like, for example, and I don't want to call names of organizations, but I will give you an organization that is very near and dear to my heart, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC. That's an organization that has an enormous history, but it also is an organization that is, frankly, inhibited by its history. So often we celebrate the successes of our organization's past, and we don't bring them forward into more inclusive and collaborative spaces. So that's the kind of work that I think has to go on. We're not nearly as segregated as we were when some of these organizations were created. So if you want to deal with social justice, human and civil rights issues in this time where our generations, younger generations, are more inclusive, we're more expansive in our thinking, we're more technologically sophisticated, the ways in which we do activism and approach social change need to innovate through the changing of the mindset of the people that we serve.
Understandably, you won't call names, and I think that's a good thing. So let me call names and ask specific questions to that name. What's in the ethos right now is Black Lives Matter, and the way they do things with the way police have criminalized Black men for just being, and that's my opinion as well. What would you do differently? And don't you think the reality is many of these organizations that are much more confrontational open the doors for the organizations like, let's say, Movement Forward, because people realize that just maybe we need to take a different tact?
Yeah, I think there's always been a dual approach to how we deal with social justice. What made Martin Luther King Jr. so successful was the presence of Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael
Exactly.
and a lot of other folks. That's
Right.
why I'm not critical of what other organizations do, but I will tell you that I don't believe we've ever successfully pass legislation or change public culture when we segregate our morality. And that's why we focus on the work that we focus on today.
Let me interrupt you a second, Reverend. I don't understand what segregate morality means.
Well, what I mean by that is when we say one group of lives matter, we have to be clear that it doesn't mean to the disadvantage of other folks. So when we say Black Lives Matter, I think our messaging, the way we approach the subject matter, our tone and tenor has got to suggest that we mean Black Lives Matter, not to say that other lives don't matter, but it's just a fact of the matter that in this environment that we live, Black and brown people are suffering disproportionately from police-involved tragedies. But I think our messaging has got to be, and I say that because in a historical context, again, I was born 10 years after Dr. King was killed, but I still am a student of that generation. As they were marching in Selma and Montgomery and St. Augustine and so many other places around the South, it wasn't Black lives or Negroes would overcome. It was Black and white together we would overcome. And that's what I mean by segregating a morality. We have to speak in a language that endears those to our struggle that need to be a part of our witness.
Let me interject here because I'm of two minds. And first of all, let me say that I'm in complete agreement with what you just said. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, the way the animal mind portion of the animal portion of our minds work, until we are jarred, things don't get done. So whereas you are pragmatic and you want to work together with people or whatever, you don't get much attention. Black Lives Matter goes out there and really put a whole lot of things in your face, then you matter because it's like, oh, I see what they're saying. I want to work with you. I mean, I spoke to the people, to the actual founder of the Black Lives Matter, and I had the same argument that you had there, that why at least didn't you say Black Lives Matter too? Just adding that one word would have prevented the right from making it a racial issue as opposed to a asking issue. And what she said was, we didn't want to further go ahead and say our mattering was in your hands. We just want to know that we matter. So I'm of two minds between messaging and actually taking command of your own being. So,
well, I think it's on par with what you and I have discussed previously, and that is there's one approach to raising the issue, but there's another approach to solving the problem.
Right.
And when I talk about the fact that we've done the marching and the protesting, there's nobody. I live in Atlanta, birthplace, if you will, of the modern civil rights movement. There's no one in Atlanta who has led more marches, protests, and demonstrations than I have, and certainly no one who has been more successful in holding police officers responsible for killing people. That has been my life's work, and I will continue to march. But at some point, we have to transition our marching into actually turning our pain into power, as I say, but really focusing on the solution. So we've done those things. This subject matter is before the consciousness of the American people. Everybody knows that there has to be some changes with regard to our criminal justice system. There have to be some modernizations, and we've got to transform some things. But just as we deal with that subject matter, we also have to deal with the other side of it, and that is in our communities and communities of color. Crime and violence has gone through the roof over the last several years. Burglaries are up, murders are up, robberies are up. And so the communities that we seek to serve by reducing officer-involved tragedies are the same communities that are being victimized disproportionately by crime and violence, which is why I suggest now that we've raised the issue, the American people understand our cry around Black Lives Matter. Now we have to turn that cry into a movement of actual solutions. And that's what we're seeking to do with our work.
Great, and that's a perfect segue, Reverend Hutchins. So what are you doing? What's your organization doing? What's the conglomerate of your organizations going to do to actually make that a reality?
I am of the belief, my brother, that as long as we're reduced to yelling and screaming at each other and standing in our individual corners with only collaborating and coalescing with people that think the way we do, there's very little progress that can be made. I've taken a distinctly different approach, and we initiated the largest police community outreach project in American history. If you'd asked me 10 years ago when I was leading marches and putting protesters in the street and getting arrested, if I would be at this place, I probably would have disagreed. But at this point, I've grown to the place of maturity where I understand that just my leading protests or marches or being a part of those demonstrations is just not enough. The more it seems as though, the more over the last several years we've continued to march and protest, the more officer-involved tragedies have come. So we put one killer of George Floyd behind bars, and yet we continue to see officer-involved tragedies. That led me to believe that we need to take a different approach. We need to take an approach that really contemplates what the challenges are. These mutual biases, the fears in all directions, are what are fueling these officer-involved tragedies. These police officers who are quick to pull the trigger don't really see the humanity in the people that they're policing. That was what killed George Floyd. It was not a violation of policy or procedure or it was not a flawed policy or procedure. The officer that killed George Floyd violated his department's policy and procedure. So what the policy and procedure was inept. What it was is that officer did not see the humanity in George Floyd. And that humanity cannot be taught in an academy. The answers to the challenges we face in this moment will not simply be printed in a policy or procedures manual, nor in a piece of legislation or an executive order. They will be imprinted in the hearts and minds of every law enforcement professional and every local community resident, which is why we have taken this approach. We created, again, the largest police community outreach project in American history, National Faith and Blue Weekend, which will occur October 8th through the 11th. We've partnered together with the police chiefs and sheriffs associations across the United States of America, the U.S. Department of Justice, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security.
Reverend, I want you to announce your event. I really do at the end where folks are going to see, but I want to take this one place before.
Sure.
You spoke about something that's factual. Crime rate in places of color has increased. Likewise, it has increased in Appalachia, meaning white area. There's something that's distinctive, and these are in areas of suffering. In the process, you've talked about inclusivity. I remember back earlier on, Jesse Jackson tried something that was fairly successful, and that was to try to bring a lot of folks in Appalachia, a lot with the other disadvantaged areas, so that it wouldn't look like a disadvantaged color issue, but a socio-economic issue.
Absolutely.
And what I find is not enough leaders are looking at it that way. Let's look at the fiasco that's occurring in Congress right now as far as a human infrastructure bill. We want to fix capital, but humanity, no. And humanity is what will solve the problem you're working on, will solve the problem in Appalachia and all these other places. I wonder, you spoke about being in silos. I wonder, people with platforms like yours, if those are the areas that will be examined as well, because there are more of us. When I say us, I'm not talking color.
I understand clearly.
In the condition that
Absolutely.
United would force a mansion, a cinema, and everybody else to jump on board policies that will make police less necessary and quite a bit more. Your thoughts on that? Then I have a final for you.
I cannot agree with you more. This is really what we're doing in this moment is really taking a page from Reverend Jackson's playbook. I spent my teenage years under his tutelage and mentorage. I would follow him across the country. If we can deal effectively with this bridge building, coalescing, bringing the struggles of our suffering together, then we can if we can do that with criminal justice, we can do it with anything, which is why I take the different approach than some of those activists in Black Lives Matter. Until we build a tent where the suffering of the disabled, the suffering of people in the LGBT community, the suffering of women and the disadvantages of other people of color, along with Black folks, until we can build that kind of movement, we will continue to see officer-involved tragedies, because we have got to create a mass movement in this country to deal with criminal justice reform, to deal with economic reform, to deal with other legislative and policy matters. One of the things that we've done, quite frankly, strategically with National Faith and Blue Weekend is we didn't just make this about communities of color. We have more white congregations, Asian congregations, Jewish and Muslim congregations all across this country that are engaged over the course of this weekend. I just realized if we can build a mass movement to deal with this subject matter by bringing people together, because the hearts and minds of people are focused on the subject matter of policing. If we can do it in this subject matter, we can do it in anything.
Reverend Hutchins, I always ask this as the last question. What was I not correct in asking you? What should I have asked you that I didn't ask you? And please tell us about this event that you're about to have as well.
So next weekend, National Faith and Blue Weekend will happen in all 50 states and multiple locations. It is the largest police community collaboration in American history, and it is the first time in our nation's history that all of the national law enforcement organizations are coming together for a single police community outreach project. It really is a historic olive branch. Look, law enforcement leaders across this country recognize that changes are needed. There's some need for reforms. There's a need for standardization of use of force, for example. But the greater need is relational reformation. We've got to cause the law enforcement professionals that police in our communities to get to know the people that they're policing, such that bias are decreased and trust is increased. October 8th through the 11th, Faith and Blue Weekend activities will happen all across this country. It is a bridge building approach. The mission is to facilitate safer and stronger, more just and unified communities by causing law enforcement and the community to come together, to have these difficult discussions. They have to happen, but they have to happen in safe space. And that's what the faith community allows us to do. I encourage everyone to go to Faith and Blue, faithandblue.org. All the information is there. You can find events that are close to you. Let's be the change that we want to see. And we can't do it if we're simply yelling and screaming at one another.
Reverend Markel Hutchins, CEO of Movement Forward, thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel. And number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.